Throughout the years, there's been characters in the gaming industry that have just risen above the rest and etched their way into the halls of video game legends. Characters like Mario and Link, Solid Snake, Ryu and Ken from Street Fighter, and case in point, the king himself, Duke Nukem.
It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. I'm all out of gum.
One of the first games I ever played was the first episode of Duke Nukem 1 on my dad's Commodore 286 way back in the day, and it's a character that I've got a lot of love for. So I thought I'd go back and take a look at the entire series right from the beginning, back before Duke was quoting lines from Army of Darkness or torturing us with delayed release dates. So get ready to chew bubblegum and kick ass as I go back and review every single Duke Nukem game.
Time to kick some ass. Let's rock.
So in the early 90s, it seemed like Apogee Software could do no wrong when it came to side-scrolling platformers on the PC. And some of my absolute favourite games from that time period were published by these guys, like Commander Keen, Cosmo's Cosmic Adventure, and of course the first Duke Nukem game released in 1991. The storyline in this one is that you've got to stop the evil Dr. Proton who's trying to take over the world with his robots. Robots that are really ineffective but were somehow just able to wipe out most of humanity. It's all kind of similar to Skynet in the Terminator films, even down to the way that the backdrop to a lot of the levels are these ruined buildings and city streets. Anyway, the game's broken up into 3 episodes, the first one in Shrapnel City, the second one in Dr. Proton's moon base, and the third back on Earth, but taking place in the present and the future, as Duke has to time travel to chase Dr. Proton down. And these episodes are actually pretty similar to what they did in Duke Nukem 3D, with the first and the third episode being set on Earth and the second episode being set in space. Also, Shrapnel City is the location and title for Duke Nukem 3D's third episode. Gameplay wise, Duke Nukem is a fairly competent side-scrolling platformer, so you jump by pressing Control, you fire by pressing Alt, and you press up to interact with doors or control panels. You either kill or avoid enemies, you search for keys to unlock doors and collect footballs, radios and joysticks for points. Crates throughout the levels are colour-coded to let you know what might be inside them. Blue crates always have points items, red crates always have healing items, and the grey crates either have crucial items like key cards or upgrades, or dynamite that explodes after a second or so. You drink soda and eat turkey legs for health points, and as you get further into each episode you collect gear that adds new abilities. Like a grappling hook, a robo hand, and a pair of sneakers that lets Duke jump higher and also do this totally radical looking flip. Yeah, look at it, it's awesome. Duke's pistol can also be upgraded a total of 3 times to give it extra firepower, which means you can fire off a lot quicker, which helps to kill off some of the tougher enemy types. Now, there's no save points in the game, so if you die, you start from the beginning of the level, but it's not really that much of an issue because the game's not too challenging and you've got infinite lives anyway. About the only thing that makes this game a bit of a pain in the ass to play through is that some of the levels are complete mazes and meant to be as confusing as possible. Like one level in the first episode is literally called the Maze of Death. It was a technique used a lot in games from the 1990s where it just seemed they made levels as labyrinthian as possible to extend the amount of time you got out of playing it, which was fine for the time, but nowadays it comes across as being a bit tedious. Still, there's not all that much to hate with this first entry in the series, like it's still a pretty fun game for the most part, and there's a lot of charm with the visuals and the wonky PC sound effects. You can also see the way they were starting to introduce Duke's macho character a bit, which is something that would become pretty prominent in later games. But as good as I thought Duke Nukem 1 was, Duke Nukem 2 blew it out of the water. Right from the opening title screen, when you hear that Apogee theme kicking in, you know that shit was about to get real, and it did. And for like a 7-year-old kid, this was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in a video game.
I am back.
Duke Nukem 2 really blew my mind at the time with Sound Blaster sound effects, actual music composed by Bobby Prince, and even more ass-kicking attitude from Duke himself. Released in 1993, Duke Nukem 2 takes place sometime after the events of the first game as Duke's becomes something of a hero after defeating Dr. Proton. However, it's a new day and an alien race called the Rigolatans has invaded Earth and kidnapped Duke, planning to hook his brain up to some kind of supercomputer to help them win a war and conquer the planet. Of course, Duke ain't having a bar of that and he breaks out of prison to stop them. Literally the first level in this game just has you blasting your way out of a prison cell, as Bobby Prince's music kicks in, like it's just amazing. From a gameplay and a technical standpoint, I think Duke Nukem 2 is just objectively better than the first game pretty much across the board. For starters, it looks considerably better with much more detail in the environments and the enemy sprites, not to mention the animations and the sheer amount of particles and effects when firing weapons and blowing shit up. Duke Nukem 1 had 10 or so enemies, Duke Nukem 2 has 20, and the enemy types are a lot more varied than just walking left or right and shooting at you. There's an attack ship that flies past and drops bombs. There's a ball of toxic slime that can move along either the ground or the ceiling. And then there's spiders that can grab onto you, among a whole bunch of others. Movement's had a bit of an overhaul too, so now you can climb up ladders or chains. You can duck and fire, or you can aim up and fire straight up above your head. At one point you can even hop into this hovercrafty kind of thing and fly around. Duke can also use a few different weapons now as well, aside from his default blaster, including a laser gun, a rocket launcher and a flamethrower that doubles as a jetpack if you aim down and shoot while jumping. Then there's a rapid fire power up which is handy regardless of the weapon type you're using. Instead of 3 episodes, there's now 4, with each episode having 8 levels each, and these are vastly different to each other. Unlike the first game though, where death meant a complete level restart, Duke Nukem 2 adds in a mid-level checkpoint. But the only thing I bring up that it's lacking is that they've removed the jumping boots, the grappling hook, and the robo hand from the first game, which seems a little bit odd. Instead of these, you can now grapple onto chains with your bare hands without a grappling hook. And Duke still does a flip when he jumps every now and then, just without needing to find the boots first. But the amount of stuff they've added in lieu of this makes up for having this taken out. And I think the fact that the levels are much easier to navigate now makes this way more enjoyable to play than Duke Nukem 1. As a kid, I just really loved this game, and I can still remember loading it up for the first time with my dad and both of us playing through those first few levels together. It was just such an awesome improvement over Duke Nukem 1, and when you look at them side by side, it's easy to see a huge difference. Amazingly too, it was even ported to the Game Boy Color in 1999. But the next game in the Duke Nukem series though was where it all took off, and where Duke finally got solidified as one of the greatest characters in the history of the gaming industry. And you know what I'm talking about, Duke Nukem 3D. What can be said about Duke Nukem 3D that everyone doesn't already know? It's one of the best first-person shooters ever made, but also I think just one of the best games ever made, period. Released in 1996 at a time when the first-person shooter was already making leaps and strides, this thing came along with the brand spanking new build engine, and still managed to kick things up another notch. And the music, my god, the music. It might be some of Lee Jackson's best work, and I think most people know Grab Bag and Stalker, which are some of the best tracks ever composed for any FPS game. Not to mention John motherfucking St. John as the voice of Duke Nukem himself. A voice that's been etched into the brains of gamers around the world, and a voice that can spontaneously impregnate women.
I'm Duke Nukem, and I'm coming to get the rest of you alien bastards.
No longer did the hero of the game simply grunt and moan in pain. Now he was fully voiced, letting off cheesy one-liners during combat to give him much more of a personality. And you really felt like this macho, roided up ass kicker going around saving the Earth from an alien invasion.
You guys suck.
Even to this day, it has an impressively high amount of environmental interaction, and it still plays really well as a shooter. The destructible elements in certain levels, like how you can literally blow chunks out of the map, just still looks cool. Not to mention pixelated TNA. I mean, I'm still pretty confident that this was the first time I ever saw boobs in a video game.
Shake it, baby.
On that note too, it was a pretty damn mature game. In fact, it even got censored in Australia, removing most of the adult content and a lot of the violence. Though of course, any Sonny Jim with basic knowledge of MS-DOS could easily get past that, and I did. The story should be pretty well known by this point, but the gist is that the fate of the world again rests in Duke's hands, and he has to save the planet from another alien invasion. To make it worse, they stole our chicks, and like Duke says, no one steals our chicks and lives. By this point in the series, Duke is a full-blown, woman-loving, ass-kicking action movie cliche. His physique at this point would get him into the Mr. Olympia competition, and his persona and attitude makes him seem like an absolute Chad. He's the kind of guy you want to go drinking with and have in your corner during a street fight.
It's time to abort your whole friggin' species.
And you bring the fight to the aliens across 3 chapters, or 4 if you're playing the Atomic Edition, each with around 8 levels ending in a boss fight. Like Duke Nukem 1, the first and the third episode take place on Earth, with the second chapter, Lunar Apocalypse, taking place in space. For its time, and even by today's standards, the weapons are varied and fun to use. There's the pistol, the shotgun, the ripper cannon, the RPG, and then more creative ones like the freeze thrower, the shrink ray, and the devastator. It also introduced an inventory system where you could hold onto a med kit, night vision goggles, a jetpack, and of course steroids. It's rare to see a game that adds in so many new mechanics and features, but also do it so seamlessly, and it's really a testament to how groundbreaking Duke 3D was at the time, but also how well it stood that test of time. Even the enemies are all so unique and different to one another with different behaviour and attack styles, that you can instantly assess what kind of threat they pose within moments of seeing them. To be honest, I really struggle to find things to complain about with this game, and along with games like Doom and Blood, it's just something I come back to multiple times a year, just to play through again for shits and giggles, and it never gets old. The only thing that has consistently pissed me off in Duke 3D throughout the years are those annoying fucking sentry drones, whose entire strategy consists of making annoying noises and beelining towards the player before blowing up. They encapsulate what I hate most about the second episode, along with the abundance of the Protozoid Slimers and Battlelord sentries that you have to fight. They just take way too many hits before dying considering their numbers and the damage they do, and they're the most annoying enemy types in the entire game, I'd even argue the entire series. Exploding suicide type enemies are the bane of FPS games, and these things are a perfect example of that, but it's nitpicking what's otherwise a really solid title. There's just so many ways to play this game too, like it's almost been ported to every single platform. It's been obviously on PC and Mac, but also the Sega Saturn, then there's Duke Nukem Total Meltdown for the PlayStation 1, Duke Nukem 64 for the Nintendo 64, and then a recent port for the Xbox 360. Then there were a whole bunch of mobile phone ports, and it even got ported to the Sega Genesis, which is amazing in and of itself. Not to mention all of the various remasters and repackages like the Duke Nukem Megaton Edition, which was developed for the PC, the PS3, and the PS Vita. And then later on the World Tour Edition for PC, PS4, and the Xbox One, which also included a brand new 5th episode. Now, the Megaton Edition and the World Tour Edition are pretty much entirely the same as the original game. They're just different kind of remasters or repackages that let the game be played in a higher resolution. The Megaton Edition comes with all the expansion packs as well as all original 4 episodes, most importantly episode 4, which was released alongside the Atomic Edition. The World Tour Edition was released in 2016, published by Gearbox Software, who held the rights at the time, and it's a pretty good looking remaster with some gorgeous new lighting effects. It also includes a brand new 5th episode created by some of the original 3D Realms dev team, though oddly it doesn't include any of the expansions.
Why so serious, Sam?
With the console versions, the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation version are mostly just ports of the PC version with not all that much changed, aside from the Saturn version running on a different engine. But it's Duke Nukem 64 though that's probably the most unique. So for starters, every single weapon sprite has been updated if not completely replaced. You still use the pistol, shotgun and the pipe bomb, but the ripper cannon's now replaced by dual submachine guns. The RPG is now a more standard looking missile launcher replacing the Devastator, and there's a grenade launcher as well. The Shrinker and Expander have been combined into one weapon, and instead of the freeze thrower there's now a plasma cannon that can be fired rapidly or charged up. The adult content has been cut almost entirely. In Red Light District, for instance, the porno store is now a gun store. How American. And the strip club towards the end of this level is now a parking lot out the back of a Duke Burger. There is still babes in the game, but they're all fully clothed. And the semi-nude ones you'd see in the alien cocoons are now fully covered and can be interacted with to rescue them. On top of that, the steroids are now called Vitamin X, so overall this is a much more kid-friendly version. Probably keeping in line with Nintendo's code of practice for content in their video games. Otherwise though, it still plays mostly the same aside from a few level changes here and there, and the fact that you have to play all 30 levels back to back. You can't simply start from episode 2 or 3. But the only thing I really dislike about this version though is the music, because there isn't any. Yeah, nothing. Aside from a remixed grab bag at the main menu, there's no soundtrack at all, and that's a pretty huge blunder. You can't really expect it to be a perfect port considering it's running on a Nintendo 64, but I think overall they did a pretty good job of carrying it over. And if you didn't play this on the PC and this was your first foray into the series, it's not as bad as it could have been. But there's just no reason to play this anymore, and everything it does, the PC version does better. The controls, the performance, save files, you name it. It's even more redundant now because it's even being ported entirely to PC in a mod that runs in the eDuke source port. This way you can appreciate all of the new content and the changes without suffering through single-digit frame rates and what's quite honestly a handicapped control scheme at this point. You can even choose which episode to start from. At this point, Duke Nukem Forever was about 15 years off being released, even though it was originally supposed to be out around the early 2000s. So what happened at this point is that the series moved to the consoles for a bit with a few different games, those being Duke Nukem Time to Kill and Land of the Babes on the PlayStation 1, and Duke Nukem 0 Hour on the Nintendo 64, all third-person shooters with similar themes involving time travel. Time to Kill was the first one to come out and it was developed by N-Space and released in 1998 for the PlayStation 1. Its story is kinda like a mix of Time Splitters and Daikatana, even though it preceded both games by a few years. In the game's opening cinematic with a song that's 1998's version of Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, Duke is attacked by pit cops in the lamest looking strip club I've ever seen. And then he has to chase a time-traveling alien race and stop them from messing around with his timeline.
Oh yeah.
This takes him from present day to the Wild West, medieval Europe, and then ancient Rome. And it's actually a pretty cool concept, and Duke's outfit even changes to reflect each time period, which is pretty funny. Thing is, the level design is needlessly complex a lot of the time. Pretty much every single level requires you to find 3 of something to progress, like 3 time crystals, 3 scraps of paper, 3 jewels. And it's just a bit of a maze hunt to find all this stuff, and not a particularly enjoyable maze hunt either. At least it still keeps things pretty close to what makes Duke what he is. There's heaps of low polygonal semi-nude women for Duke to ogle, and he's got plenty of one-liners too.
Who's your daddy?
And some of these are really funny too and kind of original, which is good.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your chicks. Little pig, let me in, or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll kick your ass in.
There's the return of weapons like the pipe bomb in the RPG, but it also adds in new weapons like a flamethrower and a Gatling gun, which can even be upgraded to be turned into a Gatling laser. Time to Kill's single biggest problem though is the controls, which are just utter dog shit. I mean, the shooting side of things ain't that bad, and the game has a liberal auto-aim system which is almost essential, but the platform controls are just horrible. It's got that early Prince of Persia Tomb Raider vibe where you have to have almost frame-perfect precision when trying to jump and grab onto a ledge. But even then, half the time the game just seems to ignore your inputs and not jump at all. It's just incredibly frustrating. This was actually one of the reasons why I never finished this game as a kid, and I just ended up using cheats to get through all the levels. Playing it now as an adult and trying to slug it out and get through it properly, it's even worse than I remember it. There's platforming sections in this game that are just downright sadistic over pools of lava or bottomless pits, forcing a checkpoint restart. It is far from being bad, but it's really a product of its time and it plays and feels like exactly what it is, which is a janky third-person shooter released for the PlayStation 1. Overall, not a terrible game, but not really amazing either.
Hello, McFly?
Duke Nukem 0 Hour was released on the Nintendo 64 a year later in 1999, developed by Eurocom, who also worked on Duke Nukem 64. And like I said before, it's kinda similar to Time to Kill with a time-traveling component to the storyline. It's the same again in the sense that Duke's having to travel through time and stop aliens, but there's pretty huge differences between the two. For starters, in Time to Kill, Duke is working alone without any assistance, but in 0 Hour he's working alongside the US government, which basically serves the same purpose as the EDF.
Damn it, what have these guys got against my rides?
In Time to Kill you visit 4 different time periods, but in this one it's only 3. There's a future version of Los Angeles where the aliens have taken over, then the Wild West again, and finally Victorian-era London, which almost has a horror feel to it, with the streets being foggy and eerie and zombies skulking around. 0 Hour is most reminiscent of Time to Kill during the Wild West levels, obviously because of the theme, but they again take place in similar locations like frontier towns, canyons, and mines. A lot of the weapons are the same, so there's the pipe bomb, the freeze thrower, and the shotgun, but there's also a few new additions. If I had to pick a favourite out of the two, I'd have to say that it would be 0 Hour, simply because of just how much better the shooting and the controls are. Like, this one is pretty much just a third-person platformer. You don't need frame-precise timing to perform something as basic as a jump. Run up to a ledge, press the jump button, and Duke is going to jump every single time, and this is a huge improvement. There might not be the option to grapple onto ledges and all that kind of stuff, but it's not an entirely bad omission, considering it now makes the gameplay a lot more fast-paced. Moving around and firing with weapons is smooth and easy, and it still plays really well, even by today's standards. Like, you'll see the frame rate drop here and there, but the shooting mechanics are still solid with a liberal auto-aim system to help you out along the way. Levels are complex without being too confusing either, packing in lots of secret areas and babes for Duke to rescue. The whole thing is just chock full of charm too, and it never takes itself too seriously. All of the babes you rescue have different accents depending on the time period you're in.
Reckon I'm gonna get a bang out of you.
So in Whitechapel, they're all talking with British accents, because they're all proper British birds, isn't it?
Ooh, what a big boy you are.
During the Whitechapel levels, you even get to take on Jack the Ripper as a boss fight. So I guess we can close the case on that one too, because we now know that Jack the Ripper was never caught because Duke Nukem killed him.
Die like the rest.
And goddammit, I love his outfit in this level with that white shirt and suspenders. I love it. I also get a bit of a Turok 2 vibe from this game too, from some of the enemy types, the environments in the later levels, and also the gore, which is just really good.
Hail to the king, baby.
You can actually shoot a hole in an enemy's chest or blow their entire head off, which is awesome. And something about low polygonal violence is just always appealing to me. I don't know why that is, but there's just something good about it. Duke's also a lot more vocal in this game than a lot of the other ones too, like it seems you can't pick up a single item in the game without him busting out some kind of one-liner. The only thing that I really dislike about this game is the checkpoints or the lack thereof. Yes, this comes from that time when developers had no consideration for the player's time, and instead of integrating mid-level checkpoints, they just threw you right back to the start of a level when you died.
Ooh, that's gonna hurt come winter.
This isn't an issue most of the time, but there are certain areas later on that are just packed with cheap deaths, where you often can't possibly see something coming unless you know about it beforehand. One of the last levels in particular is just downright sadistic, and if you manage to beat this on the Nintendo 64 as a kid, well, then my hat's off to you, because it just requires a tremendous amount of patience. I don't know why they didn't add this stuff in. I mean, Time to Kill came out a year prior and it had at least one checkpoint per level, which even then, that was a huge benefit. It's about the only problem I have with this game. That and the Octobrains, who can just fuck right off. Overall though, Zero Hour is still a pretty good game considering the time it came out, and it's actually relatively cheap too, so long as you don't want to buy it in its original box. It also emulates really well, and it's probably one of the few of these older games that I'd recommend people check out. Sadly though, this was followed up with Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, again developed by N-Space and released in 2000, but this one I would not recommend. Whereas the stories in the last couple of games felt really fun and enjoyable, time travelling here and there and keeping things somewhat lighthearted, the story in Land of the Babes is just downright depressing. It's the same plot again about the aliens killing off all of the male population and using women for breeding, but something about it this time around just seems really mean-spirited, despite all of the women dressing like Daisy Dukes. From the opening level cinematic, you see women getting gunned down by pig cops or carried off unconscious to God knows where to be sewed. There's nothing tongue-in-cheek or fun about it. It's a morbid, fucking depressing vision of a future where only women survived and basically got turned into sex toys for humanoid pigs and gorillas. Luckily, they were able to time travel and get Duke to help them, eh?
Duke, thank goodness you received our message.
For the most part, this game controls exactly like Time to Kill, except now there's a helpful lock-on system when firing weapons, where you can target an enemy and track their movement automatically. The other thing is that there's no more health points, instead it's the first introduction of the Ego system, which got used again in Duke Nukem Manhattan Project and Duke Nukem Forever. And the way this thing works is that outside of getting Ego points through pickups, you can also earn them slightly every time you kill an enemy or rescue a babe. Lastly and most noticeably from the get-go is that there's way more of an emphasis on the story this time around, with frequent cinematics, a supporting character named Jane that Duke works alongside, and an antagonist named Silverback, who is a silverback gorilla. Yeah, appropriate name.
I'm glad to be irritating you, Silverback, but I'd rather be kicking your ass.
The worst part of this game though is not the 1, not 2, not 3, but the 4 underwater levels it has. All up, there's only 14 levels in the game and 4 of these take place underwater. And not the good kind of underwater levels either, if such a thing exists. I really hope whoever designed these levels has bad luck for the rest of their miserable life. Like, I hope they make bad investments. They buy a car that turns out to be a lemon. Their favourite pants and t-shirt shrink in the washing machine. That sort of thing. 1 underwater level in a game is fine, but 4? No. Go screw yourself.
That sucks.
It's also definitely a shorter game than Time to Kill, taking me around 6 hours to get through, but that's more of a mercy than anything else. At least they kept some of the iconic weapons though, so you've still got the Shrink Ray, the Freeze Thrower and the RPG, along with a few new guns as well. And the shooting and the controls are slightly improved over Time to Kill, but not enough. Platforming still seems to drop your inputs for no apparent reason, and precise shooting can still be tricky. Yeah, and I have to talk about the ending cinematic for this thing, which is just insane, even for a Duke Nukem game. Right, so after heading to the alien base and destroying the final boss, Duke then begins Operation Repopulation, which basically involves him dressing up like Hugh Hefner and then having sex with every woman left alive in an effort to repopulate Earth. Now look, this is insane for a couple of key reasons, right? If he knocks up every single woman in the world, that would mean that every child born is going to be brother and sister. So he's just ensured that the future of mankind is going to be made up of deformed, incestuous babies that probably end up looking like Onision. On top of that, I mean, does this guy just have bowling ball sized testicles or something? I mean, goddamn son, that's a huge sperm reserve. Am I overthinking it? Yeah, I'm overthinking it.
Who the man with a date to repopulate? I can dig it.
Overall, this game's subpar quality was reflected in its reviews at the time. IGN gave it a 4 out of 10, GameSpot gave it a 6, and it was the last Duke Nukem game these developers ever worked on, and rightfully so. It's kind of a shame too, because Time to Kill was decent enough. It's just a shame they couldn't fully improve upon the foundations. But I don't know what I really expected from a game called Land of the Babes to begin with.
That'll teach those alien maggots not to mess with my planet. Now it's time for some serious R&R.
Next, we jump ahead to 2002. At this point, Duke Nukem Forever is already a year late, and after showing off that amazing 2001 trailer, it was all that a lot of Duke fans wanted to get their hands on. For the time being, we instead got Duke Nukem Manhattan Project, and I remember that we got a copy of this when my dad bought a new graphics card at the time. This one, however, wasn't a first-person shooter or even a third-person shooter. Instead, along the same lines as the original games, it's a platformer, a 2.5D platformer to be precise.
Bacon.
Oddly enough too, the developers, Sunstorm Interactive, were also responsible for a couple of the Duke Nukem 3D expansion packs, like Duke It Out in DC and arguably the best expansion pack, Life's a Beach. They also worked on expansions for Blood and Shadow Warrior, so if anybody could have a good crack at this thing, it'd be these guys. Funny thing is though, is that Duke Nukem Forever was originally supposed to be a platformer, so in a way this might kind of be the Duke Nukem Forever we were meant to play. And you know what, Manhattan Project was pretty good, and it still kind of is. From the moment you start playing it, everything feels smooth and tight, the controls are responsive, you can double jump, grab onto ledges, it's just incredibly precise. And under all of that is a pretty challenging game. The story in this one is that Duke's in New York as it's being attacked by a douchebag named Morphix, who looks a lot like Dr. Proton. And this guy's going around using toxic goo to turn things into horrible monsters. Alligators, cockroaches, rats, and of course pigs. And our boy Duke Nukem's not going to let that slide, so he goes off to stop him.
Pigs will fly before Morphix rules the world on my watch.
The whole thing's broken down into 8 chapters with 3 levels each, the third level always culminating in a boss fight. To finish the levels, you need to rescue a babe who's strapped to some kind of bomb and also find an access card to turn off the barrier that's blocking the exit.
All yours, Duke.
Ooh, careful with those things.
Throughout each level, there's 10 nukes to find, and if you can find all of these, it upgrades your max ammo and max health points. Weapons include a pistol, shotgun, the RPG and the pipe bomb, but instead of the Ripper cannon, Duke now uses a machine gun. Newer guns include the Glop Ray, which turns enemies back to their normal size, and the Plasma Cannon, which returns from Doom 64. And to simplify everything, ammunition is shared across multiple weapons. Now that might sound kind of odd, but it's actually a purposefully refined system, meaning you don't have 7 different ammo counts to worry about, and it actually works pretty well. It also helps that shooting things in this game is really fun. Going ham with the RPG, for instance, is awesome, and the game is super gory. Explosions look and sound really impactful, and like Duke Nukem 3D before it, you can also blow up certain walls and structures. Like Land of the Babes, there's a similar ecosystem where ego functions the same as health, and is refilled whenever you kill enemies or rescue babes, which is a good way of integrating Duke's personality into the gameplay. It also does a pretty good job of mixing up the environments. So you start off on the New York rooftops, jumping from building to building before a boss fight against a chopper. The next chapter you're in Chinatown, moving along the streets for a bit, dodging cars before heading inside a nightclub. In chapter 3 you're now inside the subway, which has been taken over by mutated cockroaches and rats. During this chapter there's an awesome level where you're on top of a subway carriage, dodging poles and fighting a giant cockroach boss. For chapter 4 you're even deeper underground in a series of sewers and disused subway stations. The boss fight for this chapter is on top of a train carriage against the mutated cockroach queen. Then there's a factory, a tanker, an oil rig before the final chapter set on a space station. It's just constantly changing things up and no two areas ever feel the same.
I'm an equal opportunity ass kicker.
The only negative thing is that Manhattan Project often becomes less of a platformer at times, and more of the challenge comes from dealing with the enemies more than it does whatever hazards the environment throws at you. As a result, it's often more trial and error to a point, knowing where certain enemy types are going to be because you often can't see that far ahead. Another thing is that sometimes, for no reason, jumping and double jumping just does not work. Like a double jump won't execute at all, or Duke simply won't jump to begin with, even though you press the jump button, and in a platforming game this is a pretty big issue. You'll also get stuck on certain areas or take unnecessary damage at times because of how huge Duke's hitboxes are. But still, this is a pretty fun game, and I think it might have one of my favourite Duke quotes of all time.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of Duke Nukem. My continuing mission, to explore strange new babes, to seek out new aliens and kick their asses.
That year we also got Duke Nukem Advance, developed for the Game Boy Advance by Taurus Games, and it's unique because it's one of the few times where a Duke Nukem game has been made for a handheld gaming platform. Now, I could rip this game's head off and shit down its neck. You could tear it apart for how it looks and how it plays. But to be honest, I'm just kind of amazed they managed to get it running on a Game Boy at all. I think I'm too impressed to put on my nitpicking asshole hat and criticize it. I mean, it's a first-person shooter on a Game Boy, so you need to expect that when you go in to play it. It's actually got its own story too, so in this one Duke is working for the EDF, taking orders from General Graves, who first showed up in episode 4 of Duke 3D, and also has a more prominent role in Duke Nukem Forever, which we'll get to soon. Graves has sent him in to investigate Area 51, where it turns out those damn dirty aliens are back, trying to wake up a bunch of their kind that are in hibernation in Egypt. After blowing them all up, Duke then heads to Sydney, Australia. Yeah, Duke goes down under to destroy a doomsday device. You even go inside the Opera House and can see the Harbour Bridge at one point. Amazing. Then for the ending, Duke makes his way to the alien mothership and blows them all to Kingdom Come. You've got Duke's shotgun, the RPG and the pipe bomb, which all use sprites from Duke Nukem 3D, with the Ripper Cannon again being replaced with an MP5. Because it seems a lot of these developers really hate the Ripper Cannon for some reason. Oh yeah, and the pistol's now a Desert Eagle. There's even a 4-barreled version of the shotgun, which is amazing in concept alone.
What a mess.
Enemies are mostly just reused from Duke 3D, with the Assault Trooper, the Pig Cop, Enforcer and the Octobrain being the most common. Level design is simplistic, I guess, because it kinda has to be, and the only real challenge comes from dealing with the frame rate and the sluggish controls. But the whole thing can be finished in about 2 hours and really just serves as more of a novelty than anything else. Like seeing someone use old hard drives to play the Doom theme or getting Skyrim running on their fridge. Still, it is kinda hard to hate on this thing. I mean, it's just so damn charming. Making fun of this thing would be like going to a kid's athletics carnival and insulting them because they don't run as fast as Usain Bolt. But don't worry, there's one more Duke Nukem game I can make fun of, and you knew this one was coming, right? Yep, the last on the list is Duke Nukem Forever. What can be said about Duke Nukem Forever that hasn't already been said a billion times already? It's probably one of the most infamous games of all time, notorious for its lengthy development cycle, and then the issues it faced between 3D Realms and Gearbox Software, which saw 3D Realms lose the reins on it completely. It's kinda hard to believe it was originally supposed to come out in the late 90s, but didn't see a proper release date until 2011. I went from being a sexually frustrated high school student to a sexually frustrated adult before it finally saw the light of day. Taking place sometime after the events of Duke Nukem 3D, Duke has become a hero and capitalized on his popularity, becoming an international celebrity.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Nukem.
At the beginning of the game though, the aliens return, hovering above Earth, apparently in peace. Duke's told by the president that he's not to engage them and that we need to give them a fair chance, even though if history repeats itself, they've shown they can't be trusted. I'm sure there's some kind of current political climate joke to be made here about this, but I'll leave that up to the people in the comment section. Anyway, point is though, Duke can see through their bullshit, and he's right, because before too long they attack, stealing our chicks yet again. What follows is an 8 or so hour long campaign that plays around with a bunch of different ideas and mechanics. Early on in the game, you're shrunk down and driving through a casino on a remote controlled car. Then you're taking on aliens in the Vegas Strip before driving through the Nevada desert in a monster truck to the finale at Hoover Dam. Environments show off a high level of interactivity, something that Duke Nukem 3D was well known for. There's plenty of sequences involving semi-nude women. One entire chapter takes place inside a strip club, where your main objective is to find a dildo, a condom, and a bag of popcorn. Not even kidding. Then there's the return of all Duke's classic weaponry. They even included the Ripper Cannon, finally. I also like how they brought back the ego system for health again, even if it is a way of just hiding regenerating health if you break the whole thing down. And you improve this by doing things like lifting weights or taking a piss. But the issue is that by the time this thing finally came out, Duke was just a bit of a relic and he just wasn't relevant anymore. The constant sex jokes and innuendos just started to feel a bit lame. More so if you consider now that at this point, Duke would have to be pushing his 50s, and there's nothing cool about a 50-year-old dude hanging out at strip clubs. It'd be like watching the Fonz coming out of retirement and still going back and hitting on 20-year-olds. It also feels like a game that had a bunch of people working on it, which is exactly what it is. It's like watching a movie that's had multiple directors. The tone and feeling is just really uneven and constantly changing. It's like a tug-of-war. And Duke Nukem Forever suffers from that. It's lacking a more focused and refined campaign as a result. Aside from that though, it just didn't really do anything all that impressive anymore. We'd seen all of this stuff before. A large environment we could drive around in freely, well yeah, Half-Life 2 did that back in 2004. The saddest part though is that if it had have come out when it was supposed to back in the early 2000s, it would have been a masterpiece. By this point though, it was just too little too late. Still, as average as the whole thing is, it definitely wasn't as bad as a lot of people made it out to be. Was it disappointing? Yeah, it was. I was even one of those assholes that ordered the special edition of the game that came with a bunch of useless crap, so imagine how I felt. But I think it was still far removed from being the worstest game ever made, as some people claimed at the time. Wasn't even the worst FPS of 2011. I think that award goes to Carla Juarez, the Chartel. Probably didn't help people's impressions though that one of the first things you could do in the game was pick up a giant turd and start throwing it around. What a sad way to end Duke's career though, with an unfulfilled game like Duke Nukem Forever. It still hurts me to this day.
Right in the jewels.
Now, there was another game that came out around the same time for the Nintendo DS called Duke Nukem Critical Mass, and this one's like a really shitty clone of Duke Nukem Manhattan Project. It's kind of lacking everything that made that game so much fun. Now, the less said about this one, the better, and there's few reasons that few people know about it, and that's because it's just complete rubbish. In fact, the only reason I'm really wasting my time talking about it is because I know if I don't, there's going to be someone in the comments section who has a go at me for not covering it. Even compared to other Nintendo DS games, not even holding it to the same standards as something on the PC, this one is still just really crappy. It combines the platforming controls and perspective of Manhattan Project, but with the clunky and unresponsive controls of something like Time to Kill. Honestly, there's 16-bit games that are better and more enjoyable to play than this is. Picking the best entry out of the series though is kind of impossible because it is such a subjective thing. I think a lot of it has to do with the first or the earliest game people played, which is what they end up siding with as their personal favourite. For me, it's Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, I played Duke Nukem 1 first, but I spent the most time playing Duke 3D more than any of the others. I was just starting in high school when it first came out, and a violent shooter with pixelated boobs was about the most amazing thing I'd ever seen at the time. And then I've spoken to some people who say that Manhattan Project is their favourite, and then others who, amazingly, say that it's Land of the Babes. And I think that's what makes this series and Duke as a character so important, is that regardless of what format he's played in or what genre he appears, he's always resonated with gamers. Duke Nukem Forever might have fucked all that up, but if you played a lot of these older titles when they first came out, he would have definitely left a lasting impression on you. I mean, he doesn't say hail to the king for nothing, you dig me?
They're gonna blow the whole damn planet? That sucks.
I don't think it's the last we'll see of him. There's just too much potential with the character, and the boomer culture's at an all-time high right now, so it's only a matter of time before we see him return. Besides, who else is going to chew all this bubblegum and kick all this alien ass if not Duke?